Hey, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. And today, let me get this so we can see a little bit better there. This is Mark Charles, and today is Thursday, November 30. And I am thrilled to be sitting down for my second cup of coffee. And I want to have a conversation with you today about a book I just read, So We and Our Children May Live. It's a book by a good friend of mine, Sarah Augustine, and her co-author, who I also know well, Sheri Hostetler. And this book it's a challenging book to read. I'm not going to deny that. But I'm thrilled to have read it, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk with them about it, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. I think it's a book absolutely I would highly recommend and that we need to be discussing. So I'm going to bring them on in just a moment. But before I begin, I want to do just like I always do and acknowledge I'm speaking to you from what are now called Washington, D.C., but where I live is currently as traditionally the land of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host of the land where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So I welcome you to grab a cup of coffee, join me and pull up a seat for my second cup. And I'm thrilled to have both Sarah and Sheri on with me today. Let me now bring them onto the screen alongside of me.
Morning.
Good morning.
Sarah and Sheri, thank you so much for joining me today. Let me get over so people can see me a little bit.
Pleasure to be here.
It's so good to be here with you and to be able to have a chance to talk with you. Please introduce yourself, if you would, for a moment. I'll start with you, Sarah, and then we'll go to Sheri.
Sarah Augustine, the Executive Director of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, and also the co-founder.
And I'm Sheri Hostetler, and I'm also one of those co-founders of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, and I'm a Mennonite pastor in San Francisco.
Well, Sarah and Sheri, thank you so much. I see online we have Mr. Phil Fox joining today. Hey, Phil, we're going to actually be with you and Sarah and Sheri in a few weeks on their podcast talking. Phil's going to join us for that. So, Phil, thanks for joining today. And Shantina, hey, thank you for joining us from Virginia. It's good to have you here. So, Sarah, you wrote the book, The Land Is Not Empty, which I had the absolute honor of writing the foreword for. And this book is, would you call this next book a part two of that book? Or is it, because you're going in, one of the things you did really well in The Land Is Not Empty is you talked about how the doctrine of discovery is being used today globally to dispossess indigenous peoples of their lands, and the way it's happening through corporations and mineral extraction and mining and things like that. And this book, at least the first third or half of it, is that on steroids, where you go really in hard on that same issue. So would you view this book as a part two, or how do you see this book in relationship to your previous book?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the original book was an attempt to try and ground the reality for Indigenous peoples around the globe, that reality that you and I, Mark, know intrinsically because it's the story of our lives, and can so easily become sort of an abstract historical idea. And I wanted to really make the case that this is current and it defines the lives of Indigenous people today and defines the lives of everybody, actually, especially those that benefit from it. And so I think in this book, I think it's the 2.0. I think the first book is really the introduction, and this book is really trying to provide, I wouldn't say more details, but maybe a deeper look at what it might take to change course. Like what is happening that we have this system of oppression that so many of us are blind to and okay with, and what would it take to change course?
Yeah.
And may I add to that I think one of the things Sarah and I talked about was that the logic behind colonization and extraction is now coming for everyone. It impacted, obviously, Indigenous peoples first and horribly. And I think what we're saying is that same logic is now devouring the planet. and it's impacting everybody. So it was kind of like, white person, if you think you're immune from this, you're not. And I think we wanted to make, honestly, people who may not have felt vulnerable in the past, to alert them to their utter vulnerability within what we call this system of death.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I just finished reading your book today, and I'm going to give a little secret of how I read your book. Okay.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I this past several months, I've been traveling a lot. I've actually been driving a lot. I drove through Montana. I've driven around Alaska. I've driven all over the place, and I've had hours and hours in the car. I have not had time to sit and read, but I've been using Audible to devour my books. Now, the challenge with Audible is there's some books that are not on Audible, such as your book, So That We and Our Children May Live. And I was getting up close to this interview, and I'm like, I have to read this book. I had bought the Kindle version of it because I'm like, at least I'll have it on my computer, so I'll have it with me, and I can maybe read it that way a bit more quicker. It'll be on my phone, but it still wasn't happening. And I was coming up just a few days away from this interview. I have to find a way to get to read this book. It wasn't a lack of desire. It's like, I don't know how to do it. And so I did some research. I talked to my assistant, and what I learned is if you download the Alexa app from Amazon onto your phone, and they have an Alexa app for both Android and for iPhones, or you can download it to your computer, Alexa will read any book you have in your Kindle library to you.
Whoa.
Oh, it's amazing. There's like this whole new library of books that's now open to me.
That's amazing.
And by the way, Mark, in our contract, we're supposed to get an Audible version of this. I don't know when and how that's going to drop, but for your viewers, we believe we are going to have an Audible version at some point.
Maybe they'd rather hear Alexa read it to them than us.
No, so I will say this, having listened to dozens of Audible books, I really like books on Audible. They bring in professional readers, and they do a very good job. And many times they'll have the author read the book, which is even better because they'll know all the intonation and everything else of how they were expressing it in their minds. I was prepared to listen to a very canned, very monotone reading of your book. And I was pleasantly surprised at how I found the Audible version, or the Alexa version, was not that distracting from the book. So it wasn't as good as an Audible book, but it was definitely better than trying to find the time to sit down with either the Kindle or the physical book and read it that way. I went for a 2-mile walk this morning to finish up the book today. And I have to confess, I got to the last, like halfway through one of your last chapters, and then I'm like, okay, I have to just go for the interview now. So anyway, so I say I'm finished, meaning I can see the end at the very, very
Mark, we revealed all the secrets of the universe in the last chapter.
Dear.
But I will have to. So your book is kind of divided up into sections, and your first several chapters of the book, you really wrestle. You paint the grim picture of what we're in, and I think one of the most pointed things, one of the things you point out most clearly in that is climate change, rising temperature, and reducing fossil fuel usage is only at best 1/9 of the problem, right? You talk about there's 9 different measures of sustainability for the planet, and climate change and fossil fuels is just one of them. And we're failing on almost all of those measures, not all of them, but on many of them. And we're going to be failing on almost all of them at some point in the near future. And so, again, it paints this, and I will have to admit, it's almost overwhelming. And this isn't a new idea for me. When I ran for president, when I ran in 2020, I said to people on my speeches, in my campaign, that this is not just about buying an EV car or changing, what if we have solar or not. I said it's our consumption. As Americans, we consume, like the lifestyle of not only America, but of the West, is not sustainable. And the solution is not just to train everyone to consume like us. I mean, that's going to even further. So I said frequently, we have to learn how to consume less as a nation and as individuals. And that is one of the big points you make and you emphasize. But I will admit that what was challenging for me, just even listening to the first several chapters of your book, is you gave fact and research to the points I was observing in my campaign.
Yeah.
And you were saying this is why and this is what's happening. And so is there anything in there that you want to just highlight? I know we said earlier there's some other discussions I want to have around your solution stuff, but anything you want to specifically highlight from those first few chapters that you feel are most important that people get about how we're over consuming, how we're continuing to extract, and how it's not just fossil fuels, but it's the whole larger mindset of what we're doing. I'll let you go first, Sheri.
Yeah. Since I was the primary author of the Doom chapters, Sarah's Hope, I'm Doom. Yeah, I think what I would want to say is that the system, we're in an economic system that requires consumption. And then we of course developed a modern PR and advertising industry to make sure that it keeps goosing each of us to buy more stuff. So the system itself, when you have an economic system that is reliant on economic growth of at least 2 to 3% every year, which doesn't sound like much, but that keeps growing and growing and growing, so that the economy actually doubles every 25 years. And I think we're so used to hearing that, oh, the economy is growing, that's a good thing. But you all know that means that we are extracting more of the resources from the earth, because economic growth is absolutely linked to resource extraction and energy consumption. So we're extracting more resources from the earth than where we grow, and then we're polluting. We're dumping waste back into the earth system as we keep growing. So when we say we're going to double our economic system in 25 years, that means we're going to double the amount of extraction that we're doing and the amount of waste we're putting into the earth.
Yeah.
So I think I just want to say, like, it's a system. When you have a system that requires economic growth of 2 to 3% every year to be healthy and to not fall into recession and depression and things that are not good for people, that's why we really say, like, this is a paradigm activism. This whole system has to be redesigned. So and then I think what we're saying is that because we have this economic growth system that's really, as Sarah said, just doing what it was designed to do. Like,
Yeah.
it's in, like, no, in some ways, no blame, no shame. It's just doing what it was designed to do. Because of that, we're in this state of ecological overshoot, which is what you were referring to with these 9 planetary boundaries that we have to stay within to have a really healthy functioning Earth system. And we're overshoot on 6 of those parameters, and climate change is one of them. And I'll just give one more example. One of the ones we're overshot on is one they call novel entities. This is scientific language. It's not my language, but that just means like the plastics and the what they call forever chemicals, the industrial chemicals that we are pouring into our environment, our waterways, our soils, our bodies, and that are really wreaking havoc with us and everybody. So yeah, that's, I think, that's sort of the really brief synopsis I would want to say. And I'm very familiar with Nate Hagens. I'm a disciple of Nate Hagens, Tim. Yes, totally the same page as him.
Yeah, that was Tim Moore who just made a comment saying there's a podcast with Nate Hagens and talking about the great simplification, and says we're probably on the same page with him. Thanks for that comment, Tim. And I'm glad I had not heard of Nate, but I'm glad you had heard of him, Sheri.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the points you made in the book was even just by turning to green energy, whether it's wind energy or solar or battery powered electric power, the lithium, the copper, the other minerals extraction, all we're doing is we're replacing oil extraction with the extraction by these minerals
Yeah.
And it's not solving the problem, it's just changing what we're extracting.
Yeah.
And again, it's not addressing the larger problem, which is we have an economic system that is built on the belief in unlimited growth,
Yes.
and unchecked growth. And
Yeah.
that is the deeper problem we have to learn how to address and what to do with that. Anything you want to add to that, Sheri? I mean, Sarah, sorry about that. Oh,
yeah,
sorry. I didn't mean to.
I've already talked a lot, but I could go on, but I'd like to hear Sarah. I'd like to hear Sarah go on for a while.
Well, Sheri, I think you made a really, I so appreciated all the research that you did. Sheri was really the leader on this aspect of our work together. And one of the things that you revealed to me, Sheri, that I had not considered before was the I guess you would call it genocidal depletion of insects and insect life. And so I just spent the last 18 years living on a farm in rural Washington, on the homelands of the Confederated Bands and Tribes of the Yakama Nation. And so I'm a city girl. I grew up in Albuquerque. It was really my first experience living a rural lifestyle, and for 18 years. So it wasn't, it wasn't quick. And what I learned, I mean, I was one of those people, like many of us, who just thought, oh, bugs are just a pain, insects are, like mosquitoes, who needs them, wasps, what's the point, So it's like, oh, well, if something has to go, why not bugs? When the fact is, we cannot make food without insects. Insects are the soil constructors. They are the trash beings of our environment. They take stuff and break it down so that it can become soil. We are absolutely dependent on them. They are a sentinel species for the food web, which is to say the swallows that live on my place are absolutely dependent on the mosquitoes there in order to survive. It's their primary source of food. And so I think you said, Sheri, it was 2% a year is what you told me that they're dying off. Is that right? Yes. And that means we're going to have, so that means if we're losing 2% a year, we're losing species of insects every year. Entire species are being removed. And when did you say is the crash, the insect crash?
Well, this was actually a podcast from Nate Hagen's podcast. It was probably about 2 months ago. And he called it the insect apocalypse or something like that. We've already lost. I was just listening to one today that was saying we may have lost 50% of insect populations already. And so they don't like, I hate to even put this out because honestly, I'm a pastor. I feel, oopsie. Am I still here?
Yeah.
Yes.
I see you.
I feel like I should provide pastoral counseling when I say things like this. I don't know, do we have another couple decades of this kind of insect loss before it really becomes like problematic for survival on Earth? It's happening fast.
I guess the point I wanted to say of that is that many of us sort of live our lives from an individualist lens, believing that we can live and be separate and somehow pristine or have some kind of piety outside the mainstream. Absolutely not true. We are all embedded in a food web. All of us are mutually dependent in a closed system. We cannot remove ourselves. We are part of it. So the question is now, how do we respond as a collective?
Yeah.
Thank you. You probably can't see me right now. My camera is cut off, but you can still hear me, I'm hoping.
Yes.
I'm not frozen. Well, my picture's frozen, but I'm not frozen. Yeah. So the thing I want to talk to you about, I'm sorry, I got a little bit distracted there when I was trying to fix my camera. So beyond and we could go on for a long time talking about the insect depletion and what we need to do about that. I don't deny there's a bunch of things we need to do to address that. But one of the things that I would like to talk about, unless there's something else you want to say about the first half of the book, I really want to have a discussion about the latter chapters where you go into addressing reimagining new systems. And I think that's something that I definitely have been thinking about myself. So as I've said earlier, I've kind of learned about, or I've been using Audible to read a lot of books lately, and I've been traveling a lot. And some of the books I've been devouring have been books on personal finance and wealth. And I'm doing this to understand, where is my nation at? Like, what are people being told? What are the ideas here? So I've read things like, I've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I've read The Psychology of Money. I've read tons of things on investing. I've read an interesting book about Die with Zero, which was a very fascinating book to read. And it has got me thinking about the system of economics here in our country. And so one of the examples used in this book is that the poor, which we lived on the reservation, we lived hand to mouth, we were in thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt at different points in our life because we just didn't have enough income to even buy food. We lived in a food desert, right? We ate like crap on the reservation. We know the nearest grocery store was miles away, and we ate more processed meat and processed foods and artificial sugars and all that. I mean, it wasn't even, and even Navajo native culture, right? What's one of the unique? What's one of the used across all tribe? Fry bread. Well, what's fry bread? It's white flour fried in oil. I mean, and so it's like, I lived in this environment where almost all of us were impoverished. We all ate like crap. Diabetes is rampant in our community. Most everyone was on fixed income or some kind of just hand to mouth income, and no one had enough. And it's this lifestyle of poverty. And so in these books that I was reading, one of the points they made is that they talked about the average expenditure per person in our country on the lottery. And they said that, the average American spends $1,000 a year on the lottery. And so I did a little bit of research. We lost your back graphic there, Sheri. I'm not sure if that's going to come back or not, but we did lose your picture there a moment.
Okay.
But they said the average person spends $1,000 a year on the lottery. I put that into a compound interest chart using the average growth of the rate of return by the stock market for the past 100 years, which is a 7.35% rate of growth. Had someone invested $1,000 a year in the stock market for 50 years, by the end of that period, they would have close to $750,000. And so, some of the things this has got me thinking of is, right, on one hand, having the resources to invest in things like the stock market, that is systemically biased against people of color. Once you invest in the stock market, right, the stock market doesn't care the color of your skin. It's going to make a return for you no matter what color your skin is, no matter what your gender orientation is, no matter what your sexual, it's not going to discriminate that way. And so again, one of the solutions is people have said is, well, we just have to get people to not buy lottery tickets and instead do like investments in the stock market. But as you point out, right, the stock market, U.S. companies, corporations are what are extracting minerals. Maybe we're fighting it here in the U.S. a little bit better. And we talk about Oak Flats, we talk about Standing Rock, but we're extracting these resources from communities around the globe. And so it creates this dilemma of, okay, so to address income inequality in the U.S., it might be beneficial to have people of color invest more regularly into the stock market, or at least create 401ks for their retirement. But again, in the bigger pen, that might address income inequality here. But in the bigger picture, that's not going to solve the problem globally.
Yeah, so I just want to observe that we lost Sheri's camera, so I think she's going out and coming back in. That's what I assume. So I'll get going here. She's probably heard this 1,000 times, so I'm going to try and respond, Mark. I'm processing a little bit. So there is this sort of narrative that is in the academic literature, and I think it's mainstream somewhat. This idea of a culture of poverty, that people are poor because they've learned to be poor, and they have sort of cultural practices transferred between generations. So you have parents who are poor and teach their kids how to be poor, and so on. And this is really popular. People love this. Academics love it. It's big in the field of education research. And I want to kind of reframe that idea and propose a different idea instead, which is a culture of oppression. Because culture of poverty assumes that people are poor because they're not trying very hard. If they were only a little bit smarter, if they had a little more information, if they tried a little bit harder, they wouldn't be poor. And so, Sheri, we can hear your keyboard, but we still can't see you.
We can hear you though, Sheri.
Okay. All right. So I want to say that actually the idea of individual poor people, this idea of a culture of poverty is really an individual level lens. It's saying what is wrong with these people that they can't get it together, right? When in fact our economy, in order for our economy to be successful, capitalism depends on a hierarchical system where there are a few beneficiaries at the top and all of these people underneath who provide low-cost labor, right? And that low-cost labor has to deal with that fact. So we have this kind of ideological alibi where we're talking about, hey, what's wrong with those people on the bottom? And the fact is, those people on the bottom are fulfilling a role in the furtherance of the system. And so I want to talk about a culture of oppression, which turns the lens from individual level behavior to systemic behavior, right? Because our systems define reality. So how do we turn that lens around and say, maybe this is not, I don't know anybody, Mark, who grew up or who was born and said, what I want to be is poor. What I want is have really poor health. I want to be stuck eating fry bread, which, as you know, Mark, historically, that's a commodity food, right? That's when tribes made treaties with the U.S. government, and the U.S. government committed to providing food, not as aid, but as a contractual obligation. What they provided was the very worst kind of food a human being could consume. That's what fry bread is. I do not eat it. Okay, I just want to be really clear about that. I get that it's very much a part of the way we as Native American people interact with each other, and I affirm that. And I also want to say that is an indication of the oppression that these economic systems have put in place to absolutely diminish and crush our people. So I am saying, I won't talk about the culture of poverty. Let's talk about the culture of oppression. This is done by design. And so I want to talk about your idea about $1,000 a year in lottery tickets. So I want to say, one of the things as a social scientist, it's really important to do, we're thinking about the behavior of a group. There's this possibility of looking at things through the ideal and the real, you know what I mean? So that's sort of that puts up an idealized idea that these poor people are doing this crazy, strange thing. Why are they buying lottery tickets? It doesn't take into account how people who are benefiting from the system, how they waste money.
Yeah.
I bet you $10, upper middle class people spend $1,000 a year on lattes. I don't know that. I haven't done I'd have to Google that to find out, but I bet you it's probably more than that. So if low income people are buying lottery tickets, I want to tell you, I grew up in the underclass. I've never bought a lottery ticket in my life. Yeah. Not even one. I have no interest in throwing my money down the drain. Anyway, I won't go on about that. I won't participate in lottery. I won't participate in any kind of gambling. That's just how I am. But I do want to say, let's talk about this for a moment too. We could say, forget lottery tickets. That's kind of arbitrary. What if we gave up Christmas? What if we just said, we're not going to participate in Christmas? I bet you $10, poor people like myself in my origin story would save much more than $1,000 a year on Christmas. And I'm going to put lottery tickets in that same basket with Christmas. Yeah. Why do people celebrate Christmas? Why do poor people celebrate Christmas? It makes no sense for poor people to celebrate Christmas, the biggest commercial holiday of the year, or Thanksgiving for that matter. We do it because, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why, but I'm going to tell you why I have done that as a poor person in my life, because life is bleak and difficult. Yeah. And I'm looking for bright spots to give hope. You know, I've lived, as you know, Mark, on a reservation for these past 18 years. And I remember a neighbor, a very close neighbor that I actually have a lot of respect for and adore, a grandmother living in a household with 8 grandchildren on a disability check and a Social Security check, and saying, I have to give these kids something. Yeah. They can't just live in this kind of absolute despair all the time. And she would get a check and she would fill up her tank with gas and drive them around so they could like go listen to music and drive around together. That's also a waste of money. Like there's all kinds of things I could say are a waste of money. You know, I mean, that's not really getting at the issue, which is the lens of oppression. And so I also want to take on the stock market for a moment. I'm going to be judgy a little bit. I'm going to get a little judgy here, but friends, those people who are here in the room, your viewers, it's not towards you. It's systemic. Okay, so please don't take it personally. I personally have made the decision. I'm not going to invest in the stock market because I want no part of any killing machine that is going to oppress or destroy the lives and communities of my people. I will not participate in that. And that is what the stock market is designed to do. It rewards taking resources from the most vulnerable and shipping those resources to the empire core. Yeah. The core of the empire. That's what the stock market does. It rewards those people that are willing to do that, and I want no part of it. That being said, that's the judgy part. I would push on this idea that if you took this mythical $1,000 of lottery ticket money and you invested in the stock market, that you would get a reasonable return. First of all, I want to talk a minute about how the stock market works. There's, you know, blue chip stock, if people familiar with that idea, those that are most stable, the stocks that are most stable and have the highest yield. So if you invest in like a candy company or a shoe store, I mean, there's like, you could invest in anything. But if you're doing like a 401k, they're going to favor the most stable and highest yield stocks. Guess what those are? Oil and gas, gold and silver, copper, lithium, extractives, right? Hydropower, all power generators, public utilities, those are blue chip stocks. So when you invest your money in the stock market, if you choose to do that with the safe bets, you are absolutely becoming a contributor to this death machine, number one, and benefiting from it. And number two, here's something else I want to say. And then I have one more point. Sorry to go on. Here's the other one. 2008. Do you guys remember 2008? Anybody here remember? Anybody lived through 2008 when our entire economy melted down? Did you know that the average loss the loss for that, if you took that loss and spread it across all of the United States, it was more than $100,000 of wealth lost per household. Wow. We don't talk about that because we're like all about, you know, looking on the sunny side of our economy. Oh, great. It's growing again. You know what? There are people who lost their entire retirement, millions of people. Yeah. And we don't talk about the fact that all of these thousands of people committed suicide when they lost their jobs during 2008 and the climb out of that. So to say, hey, you know, people of moderate means, go ahead and invest your $1,000 a year in the stock market. And just look the other way for a moment. And if hopefully you weren't alive in 2008, because you would have lost your egg at that point. The stock market is not a safe place. It is there to reward the captains of industry. Okay, and then the last point is we have an economy that is a death machine. It's not just the United States, it's a world economy, but we are the leader of it. It's a death machine. It's destroying our ability to stay in this earth. And telling people of moderate means, I know you're not doing this, Mark, but I'm just saying, let's invest in the stock market is like saying, hey, we're on the Titanic, but you know, there were classes on the Titanic. Those people who saw the movie, Titanic. There's, and there's the low class tickets, and there's the, it's like, you've got fourth class, third class, second class. It's like saying, hey, people in fourth class, get up on the deck. Guess what? The Titanic, it's going down, dude. Like, it's not going to make it. It's hit the iceberg. We are at the iceberg. We've hit the iceberg, friends. Investing in the stock market may get you up to, your fourth class ticket to third class ticket. So you die, in the middle instead of on the bottom. We have to think of a different way. And that's cold comfort for people like me and my friends and neighbors who've been going without for so long. But if I were saying to someone, how should I invest $1,000 a year? This is what I would say. Food sovereignty, systems of food sovereignty, food security, indigenous systems of food sovereignty and security. That is a safe bet investment. It's not going to give you economic return, but it's going to give you food. It's going to give you community. I've lived 18 years in a food desert. It's ridiculous. Central Washington is a breadbasket of the Pacific Northwest. And in that valley, which is made up of the reservation, the state produces more hops than anywhere on earth, more mint, more apples, more pears. Like it is the breadbasket. And there are no grocery stores there. It's just like you said, Mark, 35 miles to the closest grocery store. And people are living on cans of Dinty Moore stew. It's absolutely, if we wanted to build systems of survival, let's just let that Titanic go down. If you're not investing in the stock market, man, you're not on that Titanic. Let's build something else. How about sustainable systems of food sovereignty? That means understanding our native foods, saving seeds, investing in the knowledge of our elders, building the actual physical stuff in order to feed ourselves in a good way. There's my rant.
Well, Sarah, I mean, I really appreciate you having a chance to share some of that. I can, obviously, you're very passionate about these things. And I think what I've been doing these past few months is I've been trying to understand what is the psychology behind our nation, and what do we need to do to combat that? What do we need to do to address that? I'm still forming a lot of my thoughts around the economy and around our stock market, and what does it mean to do that. And I think, yeah. So, Sheri, do you have anything you want to add to what Sarah said?
How could I possibly add anything to that? No, I don't. I do know that, some of the people I follow, including Nate Hagen, says like we need to be investing in land. We need to be investing in, there's places where you can invest in people who want to go back into regenerative farming, and how can you invest in their and what they're doing to really learn and relearn how to produce good food in a good way. I love what you said though about investing in indigenous food sovereignty. I think it's a similar kind of thing of how do we invest in those things that are going to um, to where our real wealth is, which is in the land, it is in community, it is in growing good food in a good way, in a way that doesn't deplete our Mother Earth. I think, how do we invest in those things?
Yeah, and I think that's I think the biggest challenge that I'm trying to wrap my head around right now is how do we do that when a lot of those systems are not yet in place?
Yes.
At least not in a very established way yet.
Yeah.
So again, Sarah, you say invest in sustainable food, right? Where are the systems? It's easy to go to a broker and buy a stock, or to buy an index fund or something. I mean, you can do that fairly simply. How do you go and invest in a sustainable farming network or something like that? What's the process for that? How do people do that? And what do you do? And again, I think that the challenge with this is because you say in the book, the solution is not necessarily about individual change.
Yeah.
Individual change will get us a certain part of the way there. But the bigger challenge is we have to change the system. It's the systemic change that's going to determine whether or not we go over. So whether or not you have solar on your house, or you're driving an SUV or a Prius, or you're taking your bike, that decision alone is not going to save or destroy the environment. But if we can change the system of what's going on, how do we do that? And then the question is, so then in the meantime, while you're trying to change the system, what do you drive? Do you drive do you drive a Prius? Do you drive an SUV? Do you take your bike? Like, I mean, and I think that's where, as I'm trying to wrap my head around these things of saying, what do we do as we're working towards this goal? What do we do in the meantime? For myself, I've made the personal decision years ago, as I learned about the Doctrine Discovery, I will not buy another house in the United States outside of the traditional lands of my people without first going to the people whose land I'm trying to buy, the Native Nation, asking their permission, and then working out some way to pay a tax to them for the land I'm buying. Like, I won't do it. I've chosen not to do that. Now, there are many natives who buy houses all over the country and they don't think twice about it, right? And I don't condemn them. I don't, but I'm just like, yeah, this is a decision I've made. I'm working towards this thing of trying to change how we do land titles. And unless I'm buying a home within our 4 sacred mountains in the Southwest, I'm not going to buy the home unless I first get permission from the Native Nation whose land I'm buying the home on. Even if they're not even there, like even if I buy a house, if I were to buy a house on the East Coast, I would probably have to go to Oklahoma first and find one of the nations there and say, hey, I'm on your land. I want to buy this house. Is there a way I can pay a tax to you after I purchase the house to acknowledge this is your land? And so anyway, so these are the things I'm trying to think through, and I'm in the process right now. Like, most people don't know this, I graduated from UCLA as a history major, but I went into UCLA as a pre-econ major. I actually was very, very interested in economics, and especially in high school, there were some things I learned in high school that really intrigued me about our economic system. I'm not saying even from an indigenous viewpoint, but just the things that fascinated me. And so I went into college as a pre-econ major. I took one econ class and it killed it for me. I hated it. I changed my major. I actually dropped my major and didn't pick another one up for another year and a half, and then I became a history major. But anyway, so as I've been devouring these books in the past few months, I've been like, oh, that's right, I had an interest in this kind of stuff before. And now I'm trying to understand so one of the books I've read, it's called Die with Nothing. And the fascinating thing about this book, and this is early in the book, the author says that they were a hedge fund manager and they got to the top of their industry in finance, made tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars. And they had this philosophy that said most wealthy people in America save too much for their retirement. And they put too much money aside because they're paranoid about death and they're never going to be able to spend their money. And he says we measure the value of our life in how much money we've saved rather than the relationships we've built and the experiences we had. And so he said, so rather than thinking, do I save this amount for my retirement, we should be thinking, am I having these experiences that are literally what I'm going to be living on when I get older? Is the memories of these experiences and the fruit of these relationships. And it wasn't until the end of the book that you learn the author. I mean, if you read the book in a hard copy, you would see from the back cover he was black. I was listening to an Audible. I didn't learn until the end that the guy was not white. And I'm like, oh, this is why, right? He's completely flipping the paradigm because he doesn't come from Western culture, and he's doing some things and saying some things that are radically different than the way the system is set up. But I think there's some things he absolutely got right about that, which is, yeah, we need to invest in experiences and memories and relationships. But again, his whole method was, well, we're still going to do it by using the economic system that's in front of us, which, as we've been talking about here, this is an oppressive system, not only here in the United States, but extracting things globally around the world. And so what does it mean to address that at the same time while you're trying to change? And one of the first conclusions I've come to, and you address this in your book, is as I've been reading these books and looking at this history, it's fascinated me that in the early 1900s, before and after World War II, our economy was changing. We were moving out of an industrial age. And especially when World War II ended, we had all of these soldiers coming back. They were going to now be without jobs. We had been producing massive amounts of things through our industry for the war, and all of that was going to shut down. And there was a real concern, what's going to happen to our economy? And the intentional decision was made of, we need to make this a consumer-based economy. And they literally did put policies in place, did things intentionally to make our nation a consumer nation. And I think when I'm starting to think about what does it mean to decolonize, the first thing I realize I have to tell myself and tell those around me is, we are not consumers. Our consumerism does not define us.
Yep.
As long as we define ourselves as consumers, not only do we continue consuming without regard or thinking about it, but we see that as, this is our role in making the economy better, right? So as you earn more, then you purchase more, and then you need more, and it becomes this role. And so the first step I'm seeing to, I would say, even towards systemic change, is the first thing we have to do, even before we can change the banking system or we can change the financial system or the stock market, is we have to counter the narrative that our nation's been telling us for 100 years, which is, you're consumers, and your patriotic duty as a citizen is to consume. And we need to retrain that in ourselves and in our communities, in our children. We are not consumers first and foremost. And as we change that mindset, then, and we hopefully grow that pool of understanding, then we can start having other conversations about how do we change these other systems that are desperately in need of change.
So yeah, I have a couple of comments in response to that, Mark. That was a lot. One is to say, when we were talking before about, the lottery ticket money, I think there's two different audiences. I think we were talking about investing. There's the original audience you identified, which is people who are of moderate means, right? They're living in the culture of oppression. How do they invest their money, which is the original question. And there's another party, which is those people who are living in comfort and wealth. And I don't think the investment strategies are the same. And they're very different. I mean, I'm encouraging, I guess in my response, I was saying, Indigenous people living on reservations, build food systems for yourself. Build food sovereignty systems for yourself. And there isn't something to invest in. You have to just go build it. And that knowledge is there. There are elders there who know how to do that. There are some cultural programs already in place. If you want to do something constructive with money collectively, that would be a sustainable system of survival that's localized. It's there in your community. For people who are the descendants and the descendants of settlers who are the beneficiaries of the current economic system, have a completely different message for that group of people, which is to stop the damage. Stop. Stop. Like there is no just way for you. We're in the system of power imbalance. You're the long-term beneficiary of this power imbalance, and the only way to balance power is to give up power. You have to take the lead of Zacchaeus and give up half of your wealth and transfer it to those people who have nothing. That's what Zacchaeus did, right? And then he said, if I've cheated you with my half remaining, if I've cheated anyone, I'm going to give them 4 times, compensate them 4 times for that loss. That has to happen. We have to have a massive redistribution of wealth if we're going to balance the scales. And then I want to talk about just about the economic system writ large. One thing I want to say, Mark, I didn't say this in the book because it's probably crabby, but I'm not a reformer. This ship is going down. We have to build something else, and I think we can build another thing that's separate from the system that is. I don't think we're going to reform it. Mm-hmm. I don't see how. I mean, it's like it's like a tangled ball of twine and its complexity. Those people who are the beneficiaries have a lot of power and big guns. They're not gonna change the system because we send them a well-worded note. It's doing its thing. How do we build other systems in the meantime? And I mean, I think that's the question. And the person that really influenced me in the writing of this book, and Sheri and I both, I think, is Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Indigenous person he's a Maori, is he?
I know he's in Australia. I don't know what.
Yeah, he's Australian. Yeah, so he is a Aboriginal scholar from Australia, and I read his book, which is Sand Talk, and it really impacted me because what Tyson, he's doing these thought experiments on a systems level, which is not what we ever do. We often do these super localized ideas. We express super localized ideas, and then we look for examples that are localized. And what Tyson is trying to do is look at a systems level. And Tyson says we are not going to be able to provide alternate systems using the same logic that built the system we have now. We need ideas outside the paradigm. So reform, which I would call, in this book we talk about first and second order change. Reform is first order change where the process is basically the same and you're just moving things around. So first order change, we're off fossil fuel, we're now extracting lithium and copper. That's first order change. Second order change is saying we're going to divest from this entire system and build a different system. Okay, so what Tyson suggests is in order for us to do that, we have to consult with systems thinkers that are outside our current paradigm. And I want to say an extension of that, he implies, and that I write about in this book, is consulting Indigenous systems thinkers today who are drawing from their own cosmology. Because Indigenous peoples have lived sustainably on this earth in balance for millennia. And personally, the cosmology of my people was to keep that balance, to live in balance and harmony. And I know that's true. I shouldn't say I know. I understand that's true for your people too, Mark the Dene, this beauty way, like walking in beauty, walking in harmony with all of these systems of life. And so what Tyson suggests, and I want to suggest, is how do we pull together Indigenous systems thinkers and ask them what the vital inputs and outputs of true sustainable system would be. So right now our unit of analysis in capitalism is individuals, and the output is personal wealth, right? It's profit for individuals. If we could ask Indigenous systems thinkers, what else is there? So I happen to be Indigenous, but I'm an assimilated person. But the first thought that comes to my mind, if it were up to me, which it is not, because this is a corporate idea, it's going to take collective response. But the first thing that comes to my mind is what if what we wanted instead of profit was well-being? And what if the unit of analysis was communities? What if we had an economy built to provide well-being to communities instead of profit for individuals? If that's what we wanted to build, that we would have to intentionally go about figuring out how to do that, right? We have a system that knows very well what to do to make profit for individuals. We have to imagine something else. And I want to suggest that Indigenous systems thinkers could be the beginning of helping us to imagine what that might be. And I also want to say, in terms of our current economic system in the US, one thing that I think would be a radical thing, this is a reformer thing, so this is a first order change, but anyway, what if we gave up cars? It's horrifying. It's a horrifying idea. But what if we did it? What if we said, this country has technology 100 years old to get stuff from point A to point B. We could have trains and transit built out across the entire continent. And then we would just have a few cars that are like taxi drivers or Uber drivers or something to get you to the train station. There used to be a train, a direct train from the reservation, Toppenish, this tiny little town on the reservation, to Seattle that was a daily train 100 years ago. It's not like we don't know how to do that. We do know how to do that. We say, oh, rural America, blah, blah. We've been moving stuff by train. We know how to do that. If we really were serious about getting off of carbon emissions, that's a way. It's a collective response, right? And that takes policy change. So this idea that as an individual, you're going to do something. As an individual, you can't even lobby CW what show they need to have in their primetime listing. As an individual, you can't even make that kind of change. We have to work collectively. Just as you said, Mark, the collective decided we were going to become a consumer society. And then we built out all the cultural trappings to make that happen. Yeah. We have to decide that we're something else and then put pressure on the leadership to do that. And I think we could start by saying, you know what? We don't want cars. You want to know why we don't want cars? Because we want to live. We don't want to die. We want to live. So why not? It's worth it to me. Yeah, I like my car, but you want to know what? I want to live. So I'm willing to give up my car so that we can live. That's real sustainable action.
Well, we could go on for a long time here, both Sarah and Sheri. I want to thank both of you for taking some time today. I highly recommend, if people have a chance, please pick up your book. I'm going to share your website on to the chat here. This is for the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. Can I assume there's a link there to purchase your book from that site?
I hope so.
I don't know if there is or not. If not, the book is called So We and Our Children May Live. I highly recommend you reading it. I'm not going to say by any stretch of the imagination it's an easy book to read, but as you can tell from this conversation, it's definitely going to generate some thinking and some responses and some really interesting dialogue. And that's the whole point of it, right? If we're going to have change, we have to learn how to talk about the change. And so thank you both for writing this book. Thank you both for being willing to get out and say the hard things and point these things out. And I look forward to having a lot more dialogue with both of you, both in the private and in the public forums, about what do we need to do and how do we need to move closer to this. And yeah, I will just, anything, I'll give you both a second here. Anything you both want to say? Sheri, you've been quiet for a few moments. Anything you want to say as we close out here?
I just want to thank you, Mark, because I think this is exactly what we were imagining. I mean, I was on this podcast earlier this week, and this person is, I guess I would say, just very much from the dominant culture. And he was like, okay, you have 10 seconds. Tell us, what do we need to do? And obviously that's so the opposite of what we're saying. Like this, it's exactly this kind of conversation that we're wanting to have. Like it is us coming together, starting to think together about the cold, hard reality of where we are. And then what can we imagine? Like the space that actually affords us to know that we need to build the new world within the shell of the old, as the Wobblies used to say back in the 1930s. It was a labor union saying. So I just want to thank you for hosting this conversation.
Well, thank you, Sheri. Thank you so much. And Sarah, anything you want to say here at the end and for those of you who are listening, I'm going to put a link in here. If after this session, we're going to jump over to my Patreon site. And on my Patreon, the Ask Question tier, which is $10 subscription a month, you can even subscribe just for 1 month. I'm going to have a Q&A with Sarah and Sheri, and we're going to take the conversation even deeper than we've gone in this past hour or so. But we're going to have more discussion about this. And I invite you to join us on Patreon immediately following the end of our second cup of coffee. And I just put the link there into the chat, but we'll be there 5 or so minutes after this podcast ends. But Sarah, anything you want to say here at the end?
Yeah, so Mark, I'm just so thrilled to be here with you, brother. I want to say to your listeners and those people who view this, you're absolutely a thought partner. I mean, you and I have been wrestling with these ideas at the very early hour of the morning in my time, and I just appreciate you, Mark. I appreciate your presence and your leadership, and thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for making this hour of it public. But I want to make it clear, I just appreciate you so much and your friendship and your role in my life as a relative. Thank you for bringing us into this part of your community.
Yeah.
Sarah, Sheri, you're so welcome. It's an honor to be with both of you here. I really cherish these dialogues and these discussions, and I hope they're beneficial for those who are listening. Again, if you want to join us, we're going to move over to my Patreon. If you subscribe for the first time, once you subscribe, look through the list, and you'll see towards the top of the posts I've done, there will be a Zoom link to join. We're going to have the conversation over Zoom on my Patreon. But if you want to subscribe for the first time, you should see it once you make your subscription. For those of you already subscribed, you can just pull up that link and you can join the Q&A. We'll start in about 5 minutes. And yeah, I think I was preparing for this podcast and for this discussion. One of the things I think I need to become more adamant about is both telling myself and telling my listeners and people who are engaging with me, my relatives, we're not consumers. We have a much more significant role in this world than just what can we consume. And we have to begin to change the mindset. And to change the mindset, we have to recognize we've been groomed to be consumers.
Yeah.
We've been told it's our patriotic duty to consume. We've been told that we need to do these things. And I'm not saying we stop buying things, right? One of the things my wife and I have done since we've left the reservation is we're eating healthier because we have a better access to grocery stores, right? As my wife started working and now we have a bit more income, we're buying better food. We're trying to buy more sustainably grown food and more locally grown food. And we're saying, yeah, we're willing to pay more money to get some of this food because it's actually not destroying the environment as quickly. And so again, I'm not saying don't consume, but don't let yourself be defined by your consumerism. And as you do consume, think about how can you consume most sustainably, most with the greatest amount of integrity in the things that you purchase and where you purchase and how you purchase them, and just make that intentional decision, because we've been trained to consume without thinking about it. We've been trained just to consume more, and more is better. The example you gave in your book about the big gulp, right, where how our diet is very much a symbol of our consumerism, where we consume larger and larger portions, more and more empty calories. It's literally killing us with diabetes and heart disease and hypertension and everything else. And yet we're just making more and more, and food's becoming cheaper as it's getting worse and worse for us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I want to say to my relatives, you're not consumers, my relatives. You are human people here on this earth, made for relationship, made to care for the world that we live in. And we are here to walk in beauty. And I hope that we can all learn how to walk in this beauty together. Sarah and Sheri, thank you for joining me. My relatives, thank you for joining me. Hakonet, you're welcome to join us on Patreon. We'll be there in about 5 minutes. Take care, my relatives.
Bye.